What's up, guys? I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today's episode is something I'm really excited to share with you because it's a completely different style of episode than what I typically do. So, obviously, I'm always educating, talking about different topics, having expert guests on. But I was talking to Bernardo, and we were thinking about how helpful it would be to share some particular client stories and journeys with you. So, this is the first of many, but we're going to be inviting our clients on the podcast to share their particular journey, their struggles, where they were in terms of health and fitness before they started working with us, and all of that cool stuff. Because I know that educational content is really helpful, but it's also really helpful to hear somebody's particular journey and the things that have helped them. And sometimes, I won't even say sometimes, I would say when you relate to somebody's story and understand their particular struggles, it helps you reflect on your own journey and helps you really refine and think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how to do it better, etc. So I think these episodes are going to be extremely valuable. When you finish watching or listening to this episode, I'd love for you guys to send me a message on Instagram and let me know whether you enjoyed it or not. Today's episode is going to be with Randy. He's an absolutely amazing person. Randy was really struggling with his weight and his health. He was up to about 277, 280 pounds. And in the past year and like 4 months now, he's down over 70 pounds. He actually started by taking Zepbound, which is one of the GLP weight loss medications. And he had a ton of success with that. But then he realized that he also needed to focus on his lifestyle, his nutrition, his habits, his mindset. And that's when he decided to start working with us. And he's had a really, really incredible transformation so far. So, with that said, let's get into the episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Randy, thank you for giving me some of your time today and being open to coming on the show and sharing your particular story and journey with the audience. How about we start by taking us back a little bit about your background, where you're from, what you do, and we can start the conversation around what were your main struggles when it came to health and fitness before we started working together.
Okay. So, Randy Splinter, I was born and raised in Wisconsin. I've lived all over the U.S., mostly because of school. Um, Bachelor's of Science from University of Wisconsin, Master's from Montana State, PhD from University of Kansas, postdoc from University of Kentucky. Then I left academia and joined the Hewlett-Packard Company in the late 1990s, lived outside Atlanta for quite a while. And then 4 or 5 years ago, moved to Lawrence, Kansas, back University of Kansas, hometown, for personal reasons, largely. And, I like to think I've been reasonably active over the years, lifting, cardio when I get a chance. But all that aside, I still gained weight. And I believe over the last few years, as I've started this progress down this road, it's become obvious that you can exercise, well, like the old adage goes, you can't outwork a bad diet, right?
Yes.
And so if you're sitting down every night and eating a whole bag of cheesy poofs, you're just not going to be slim, right?
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter how strong you are, um, you're still going to you're still going to be overweight. And, in terms of my weight loss journey, it was, I guess I started kind of in the fall of 2023. Um, Coming on the heels of COVID, it became, these GLP-1 drugs became first widely available, kind of, right? And I kept bugging my doctor and we couldn't get them. And finally I started one in particular in January of 2024, which is kind of where I really think the journey began. And I started with the drugs and they do work. At that point, I was primarily mostly walking at that time. Um, Throughout that spring, it was more of a walk and then a walk run kind of, so that, by summer, I was spending some time running, some time walking, splitting it kind of equally. And kind of the July, August time frame, I started lifting again. I'm about I've had a home gym for a very long time, squat, bench, all this stuff, bench or squat rack, bench, all this stuff, plates, whatnot. I just think it's much easier for me, especially when I was really busy with my job, um, just to be able to walk out in the garage or into the basement and lift, right? Not having to, strap everything together, pack it into the car, and run. And so I started lifting again. And, again, the GLP-1 drugs are amazing in what they do.
Yeah.
But kind of the September timeframe of 24, the first research studies were coming out that people who lost all this weight on these drugs, once they stopped the drugs, were just, it came back, right? The research conclusions were pretty clear that the drugs help the weight loss, but they don't help your mind, right? They don't help you break bad habits that have developed over years and decades and whatnot. And since at that point I had lost pretty significant weight, I kind of made a decision to myself, or made a promise to myself I wasn't going to go backwards, which means that I have to deal with some of these issues, right? Emotional eating, habit eating, these things that, like I said, they develop over, my case, decades likely. So I started looking at, local kind of weight loss things. I met with one or two people, and I really wasn't overly impressed with their approach. They seemed to focus on diet, which is fine, and that's a critical piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing, right? There is kind of a mental, psychological aspect of this, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And about that same point in time, I ran into Judson Brewer's book on mindfulness and the use of mindfulness techniques in eating and how to lose weight. And I thought that was really interesting. And around the same time, I'd been seeing, on Instagram, various people. You're one of them. And I started thinking maybe that some kind of coaching, and since I couldn't find anything really that jumped out at me here locally, I was going to have to do something online. And that kind of led me to reaching out to you the first time, and then making the decision to enroll myself into the Fit for Life Academy and proceed from there.
Yeah.
And, the coaching has been really wonderful. I mean, Coach Brent has been wonderful to work with. And he's had some really good insights that have forced me to think, especially about the psychological piece and how to eat, and how to think about things before you put them in your mouth. So all of that has been really good.
Yeah.
And, here I stand, January 2024, when we considered this all got started, I was about 277. And, I weighed myself this morning and I hit a new low at 2044. I mean, what's that? 73-ish pounds in round numbers. My joke has been I'm about 3/4 of the person I used to be. And it's largely true.
Yeah.
So, I plan on just pushing forward.
Yeah. Your progress has been absolutely incredible. And a big part, obviously, of your weight loss journey happened prior to starting working with us. And I want to talk about, what was that situation like versus what's it been like after starting to work with us. But I think, Randy, it probably makes sense to start this conversation even a little bit before you started the weight loss journey, right? Because it helps, I feel like, the people that are listening relate to the particular struggles that you were experiencing as well. So you mentioned that you were around 277 pounds or so, roughly, right? Talk to me about what got you to that point, right? And what was life like living in that larger body? And let's just start the conversation there, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions from there.
Well, I think like a lot of people, I was thin throughout my 30s largely, and it wasn't, the weight loss really, weight gained really started once, you march into this kind of enterprise commercial environment. I was part of a pre-sales organization, technical section. I was technical guy, part of the pre-sales engineering team. I'm at Hewlett Packard. I've been there my whole career on the pre-sale side. And, it involves lots of travel, customer meetings, customer dinners, this kind of thing. And you just kind of fall into the fact that one, frequently it's hard to maintain activity, exercise when you're traveling. Some random hotel in the middle of wherever, Dallas, Houston, wherever, you get what you get in a gym. Usually it's one or two treadmills and maybe a couple dumbbells, and that's it, right? And, of course, you have very little control over meals sometimes. And even after long days of meetings and this and that, by the time you get back to the hotel, do you have any energy to actually go to the gym? Is a even bigger question. So it just kind of slowly snowballed, right? I can't point to any really single big thing. It just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I realized, Randy, right, that it's like, before you know it, it's like, how did I change so much?
It's like, well, when I was in school, I was 220, 230. Next thing you know, you look up one morning, you're 250, then it's 260. And it's like, but how'd this happen? And, I think it is a blow to your ego and your self-esteem. Knowing that I have to go buy new shirts and now I'm buying double X's where I was buying XLs. Next 6 months later or a year later, it's triple X's or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's not because my arms got any bigger. It's because, we're on the midsection, right?
Yeah.
It is a real blow to your ego and self-esteem. And I think that helps the snowball effect, right?
Yeah.
Because that plays into now your emotional eating and all this. I feel like hell. I look like hell. I must have another, Twinkie or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, at least in my case, at some point, you just have to draw a line and make a decision that, in my case, in early 2024, I was what was I, 61 and a half years old? And I just kind of drew the line, right? At this point, I'm only going to have so many chances to lose weight before I get to that age where it just gets really, really hard.
Yeah.
And so for my own long-term health, and especially given I've had a history of some fairly serious health issues, cancer, and then most recently some heart issues with atrial fibrillation. And from my personal understanding, not being an MD, of course, it's things like atrial fibrillation largely are a lifestyle disease, much like diabetes and everything else. Hypertension, sleep apnea, all of those are tied to your weight and everything else. So, something has to give, or all of these metabolic related things are just gonna, at some point, you're stuck.
Yeah.
And then, modern research, they talk about health span. There you go. You're at the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love this. It's just on health span nowadays. And it's not just about longevity, but how healthy are you throughout your life as well?
Exactly. And I just said earlier, I've listed on and off for a long time. Even for a lot of years, I had a treadmill, I had an elliptical, I used them fairly frequently. But, well, I guess what I've learned over the last couple of years is you can't outwork a bad diet, right? You really can't. And, you can go read like Herman Pontzer's book, and he's pretty upfront. There's diet and there's exercise. There are two different knobs for different things.
Mm-hmm.
Weight loss is really what you want to do. It's diet. Really being super healthy, getting in shape is what you want to do. It's exercise. They're
Yeah.
two knobs, and they do different things. And so like I said, it became obvious I needed more counseling on how to deal with all of these psychological aspects of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Two questions that come up uh, to me with everything that you're saying. The first one is you mentioned a little bit that your goal was really health related. Obviously, you've had some health related complications prior.
Mhm.
Also mentioned how being heavier affected your confidence and emotional eating and your behaviors. I want to dig a little deeper into that. So, when you were about 70 pounds heavier than you are now, how did being that way, how did it affect your confidence, your day to day energy, your life? How do you feel now that you're down 70 pounds compared to then?
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes you feel like hell, right? Um, you go out in public and sometimes, you walk across a window or a mirror where you can see yourself and it's like, was that me?
Yeah.
Really? Um, you know, you don't feel comfortable. I think people have probably made comments about this. You have a tendency to try to cover up. You buy shirts that are larger to cover up, so-called beer belly and everything else. Um, it really does make you feel bad. Um, even when I was pretty consistently doing some kind of strength training, but still heavy. There are points where I dropped down to 250 when I was training, but again, you're never going to get kind of over that hump if you
Yeah.
don't address the nutritional piece of it.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm not entirely sure I answered the question, but yeah, you don't feel good,
Yeah.
and I never really felt healthy and felt good, despite the fact I was fairly active, went for walks, walked the dog,
Yeah.
um, lifted on a regular basis, did squats, did the bench press, all this stuff. But, you just don't really feel like you just have a negative impression. And that kind of feeds many of the other emotional things, right? It feeds especially the emotional eating aspect. At least it did for me.
Yeah, one thing oftentimes, a lot of these things are unconscious as well, and it's easy to unpack them once you've, you know,
Yes.
progress or transformation. But when you're going through it, it's hard to really be conscious about the fact that like your self-esteem is affecting your eating behaviors, for example, right? And one isn't positively impacting the other. Um, and I think that's why some conversations like these can be so beneficial for people sometimes. Let me ask you this. Do you remember any particular moment when you realized like enough is enough? I have to make a difference?
Um, well, yeah, I think it was kind of fall of 2023 when, you know, wasn't really happy. We had just basically moved back here to Kansas, and I was walking. We live in a very nice neighborhood, so there's some walks you can get up. There's some trails. Um, you can get out, you can move, you can do things. But the needle never changes, right? Um, even if you're walking, even if I'm on the treadmill running, the needle never changes. And like I said, you look sometimes in the mirror at yourself and you're just not comfortable with what you see.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it was probably that stage. And that's when I realized I had to do something more significant than what I was doing. Had to, up the game, so to speak. Um, the GLP-1 drugs were just hitting the market in any significant way. And when I approached my primary care physician on, can we try this stuff?
Yeah.
Um, I didn't qualify for a number of them because like Ozempic and Wegovy and some of these are really only FDA qualified for people with pre-diabetes or diabetes. And I didn't have those yet. So I had to wait until some of the even newer ones were tested for just pure weight loss.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's when I ran into the bound. And
Yeah.
that's what I've been using. I mean, I don't like the idea of having to take a shot once a week, but you know, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
And just, by itself is amazing. The next question, of course, as I said, is now we have to come full circle and how to deal with the habit piece of it. Because I do have a fear that, you know, if they say that, either you stay on these drugs forever or you gain it back. And I don't want to gain it back. I'm committed not to, but that means I have to fix issues that may have been around for a very long time.
Yeah. It's hard work. It's definitely not easy, right? And I think when it comes to medication, there's such a polarizing perspective on whether or not it's really good or it's really bad. And the truth is, it's somewhere in the middle, right? They
Yeah,
can be
it's a tool.
yeah, they're an extremely effective tool to cut out food noise to help with weight loss. Uh, but truthfully, nobody wants to be on medication for the rest of their life, right? If they can do things to come off medication, that's great. And I highly disagree with the argument that you're either on it for life or you regain weight. Because we've worked with other clients who have successfully come off of it. It does come down to, are you able to develop, implement, and maintain the healthy behaviors that you work on
Yes,
while you're on medication as well? So
absolutely.
so you mentioned, Randy, that you started medication, dropped about 60 pounds, started seeing some research showing that you're either on them forever or you regain weight. You realize that's not what you wanted to do, so you have to focus on some of the healthy behaviors as well. You came across our particular, company. You came across my content. I want to ask you this: what, um, what was the deciding factor for you to join us specifically? Was there something that stood out about our approach that was different that resonated with you?
Um, I like more of the lifestyle approach. You know, more you got to incorporate everything, right? It's just not diet. I mean, there's lots of people who will talk to you about diet, but I do think exercise has to be a part of it. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be a part of it. It's even even if it's developing what people call neat kind of habits, non-exercise activity stuff. We were talking earlier, we've been here what 4 or 5 years, and we got a new dog in the fall of 23, and my image has gotten really fuzzy, but um, but she's just discovered that there's carpet downstairs, right? So she can rip it up, right? Can't upstairs because it's all wood floors. So every morning we come down here and we play fetch. We just run back and forth playing fetch downstairs, at least until it warms up around here. And yeah, I can easily put 2,000 steps on just doing that. I think that's awesome. It's 8:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I've 2,000, 2,500 steps already. So, that's kind of my thing. I try to increase that kind of activity as much as possible. Playing fetch with the dog works, you know, making a conscious effort when you go to the grocery store. There may be a parking place right here. Take that one instead, right? Get the extra steps in, move a little bit more. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a critical piece of it. And, my current exercise routine has me doing cardio in the morning and strength at night or after. Um, and a lot of that is walking. Just because I run 3 days a week and I don't want to kind of get to the position where, I'm beating myself up by running all the time. So I've split between running and walking. That seemed to work for me. And, but that kind of moving all the time is important. And probably can't tell, and this is probably why my camera goes in and out. I have two standing desks here in my office. The one I'm standing at here, and there's one right behind me.
Yeah.
The one that's behind me also has a walking pad below it. So, if you've ever worked in a corporate environment, there's lots of conference calls. If you're on a conference call with 400 people or 200 people, you're never going to have to make a comment, right? You're never going to be called out. So just get on the walking pad. And that's an easy way to get another 1,000, 1,500 steps in over the course of an hour call. So
Yeah.
I think that's critical to find a way just to increase, I don't know what to call it, your kind of background activity level, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that's really, really important.
Yeah. No, definitely. Obviously, increasing physical activity is incredibly important to maintain energy expenditure high. I want to bring it back to the question, though, of what about our approach resonated with you? If I'm hearing correctly from what you're mentioning, it's our emphasis on focusing on lifestyle rather than just, hey, this is a particular diet to follow, this is some sort of workout program to follow. Our emphasis on focusing on developing healthy habits, our emphasis on focusing on building muscle and improving body composition, because as you mentioned, it's not just about diet either. You do need to marry both, right? Because
Yes.
diet will help you lose weight, but weight itself doesn't mean much if we're not preserving muscle mass, maybe even increasing muscle mass, improving strength as well, right? Let me ask you this, Randy. Um, when you first started working with us, did you have any initial thoughts or doubts about coaching? And was there anything that surprised you once we got started?
I would say yes, there were some initial doubts. Um, and I think a lot of that was a consequence of two things. One was, I guess I can say this in hindsight now, that I was just overtraining at that
Mhm.
time. I was trying to run like 5 miles 4 times a week and 3 miles the rest of the week, and still lifting and everything else. And I was just hitting a wall, and my overall mood had kind of fallen. I wasn't getting the kind of sleep I should have. And as soon as I changed especially my cardio, so I wasn't running as much, I found my overall mood changed, and I was more upbeat. I wasn't quite as gloomy. Um, Plus, it was just something new, right? And I think there's always a resistance to something new. Um, and so being told what you've been doing for the last 5, 10 years isn't necessarily the right thing, there is always some resistance to that.
Sure.
And so there's always, at least as far as I'm concerned, in situations like this, there's always this kind of handshaking back and forth between, I guess, in my case, with Brent and I, in order to figure out how one another is thinking and how we're going about this. And once that happens, then it works very, very, very well.
Yeah. And I think it's totally normal to always have a little doubt or a little bit resistant or be a little bit resistant to things because if not, maybe you're a little too optimistic, right? I think doubt is
Yeah,
a natural feeling we all have. Let me ask you this. Did any of
and this
your,
this was the first time I've ever done any kind of coaching, so
yeah,
there
well, I
is
would,
also that piece of
yeah,
it.
for sure. Like, what the hell even is online coaching? I feel like that's a question that people have quite often. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like some of the doubt around whether or not this will work stemmed from prior weight loss attempts? Did you try doing anything prior to starting medication to lose weight and improve health and had little or maybe no success with?
Yeah, I think that went on for quite a long time. I mean, I've had I really set a home gym up quite a while ago. I mean, when we still lived in Georgia. mean, I had one for a long time, and I lifted consistently for a long time. Um, but maybe I got down to 250, but that's probably about it.
What about from a nutritional
So,
perspective outside of training, though?
you know, no, not really.
Okay.
You know, in my 40s, I tried keto diets, and now we know those aren't really. I mean, you can lose weight on them, but they also have a number of really significant downsides, especially in terms of cardio health. I lost quite a bit of weight on those, but like I said, they come with some big negatives, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Um, so it's always a struggle, and I the nutrition piece, I guess, never really clicked to me. I guess, um, like I said, you can go on YouTube and you see these characters who can, they deadlift a Ford F-150, but they're big guys. I mean, it's like, dude, you should think about losing some weight, because yeah, you may be stronger than a bull, but my God, you can stand to lose 70 pounds too.
Yeah.
And there's a trade-off there. And I think in my case, I've made a decision that, building muscle's good. The cardio is really good, but there are two pieces on the exercise side. And nutrition is hugely important. I don't think you can lose weight without being very cautious on diet.
Yeah.
Um, Holding yourself in, I'll be honest, every time, I use the chronometer app, like so many people, when you enter things in after a meal, sometimes it's really shocking on what stuff, the calorie content of some foods, things that you never thought about. You have a biscuit and you enter it in. It's like, it has what calories? How, how do you do that? It's only this big. How do you do that? I mean,
Butter.
what are you putting in there, for Christ's
Yeah.
sake? Um, and it's eye opening when you start trying to understand um, the calories and what you're really consuming on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I think the nutrition piece is where a lot of people struggle. We have a number of,
Absolutely.
yeah, we have a number of clients, Randy, who um, have never exercised, have never really focused on eating a healthy diet, and they see really fast progress when they start implementing a little bit more exercise, a little bit more movement, and even some minor changes to diet, right? And then we
Hmm.
have clients who come from a background similar to yours, where they've been active, they do cardio, they lift weights, and they still struggle. And it's really that diet piece. And like you mentioned, maybe they've
Yep.
tried all sorts of different diets, hopped from keto to fasting to whatever. And I don't think there's anything, too inherently wrong with some of those approaches, besides the fact that for most people, it's hard to sustain long term. And not only is it hard to sustain long term, Randy, like one of the things we focus on is education as well, and learning how to have flexibility, right? Because I think one of the biggest issues with having a strict plan, Randy, is that it doesn't teach you how to navigate real life situations, right? What do you do if you go on vacation and you can't stick to your keto diet or you can't do whatever? Like, and then the psychological aspect comes in of like, well, I messed up for the weekend already, so might as well just give up completely. And that's not healthy at all, right? Which I think ties into this next question I want to ask you, which is, since starting to work with us, what are some of the biggest changes that you've made that have really helped you start seeing some cool progress?
The number one is just tracking calories.
Hmm.
And excuse me, coming to the recognition that, things you've eaten for a long time, have just like have surprising amount of calories. Um, and looking at labels on things, before you put it in your mouth, look at the label, just see how really scary some of these things can be. Um, Trying to focus on whole foods again, because you look at the labels on some things you've probably eaten for years, and it's like 2/3 of the ingredients I can't pronounce. I mean, I need to take another chemistry class, right? Um, and what's the long-term health effect on these things? Why are they even there? Is it just shelf life? And that seems a little silly. Um, so yeah, pay super attention to the labels, pay super attention to what you're putting in your mouth, and try to be honest in tracking, because it's also really easy to cheat on tracking, right? To tell yourself, oh, one handful of chips ain't gonna matter, right? Well, but you look at the label, a handful of chips is 200-ish calories in round numbers, right? So, if one handful becomes two, well, okay, now that's, in my case, that's something like um, 5.5 handfuls, and I'd hit my daily calorie allotment, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's easy. It's easy if you're not really careful on these things,
Yeah.
and if you're not really paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you mentioned, one of the biggest changes is tracking calories, but essentially what tracking calories helps you do is create awareness around your eating behaviors, right? Like most people
Yes,
don't even have awareness about how much they eat. And Randy, it's a good topic to dive a little bit deeper into, because oftentimes I hear people say that, like, they want to lose weight, but they don't want to track calories. And I get it. And tracking calories is by no means something you have to do for the rest of your life. Nobody wants to track their calories the rest of their life. But if you've never tracked your calories before, dedicating a solid 4 to 6 months to track everything you eat diligently will teach you more about your eating behaviors and the caloric density of different foods and how to make appropriate substitutions and how to choose the right foods. It'll teach you more about those things than anything else you can do, right? Because there's a difference.
absolutely.
Yeah, there's a difference, Randy, between like reading a textbook and understanding the material and then actually trying to implement the material and see how you navigate that, right? So for those of you guys listening, if you've never tracked calories, if you're resistant to it, maybe if you tried it but didn't give it your all, it's not fun. And it's not something you have to do forever. But if these health related goals are important to you, I do encourage you to focus on tracking for a couple of months and do so diligently, because it really does have a cascading effect on your behaviors, right? Like, I think you would agree, Randy, that the benefit of tracking isn't necessarily tracking itself, it's how it influences your behaviors. And then ideally, if you're doing that in a healthy fashion, those behaviors stick long term, right?
Exactly. Exactly. If you've never done it before, like I said, if you've never done this before, you may not understand that handful of chips is 200 calories.
Exactly.
Well, okay. Um, on the other hand, you could have an apple, in an apple which has more fiber, maybe more satiating, and yet it's 100 calories, maybe less, depending on the apple. Um, and it's an apple is filled with, phytonutrients and all kinds of things, which is really good for you.
Yeah.
Whereas potato chips, well, I mean, I guess technically they're made out of potatoes, but you sometimes wonder, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some of these snack foods, it's like, maybe there's something to plant in there somewhere, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a great point. You don't have to do it your whole life. You just have to develop kind of a gut instinct on
Exactly.
how much calories are in some things. And it doesn't have to be accurate. You don't have to be 100% because, right? I mean, federal law says food labeling only has to be accurate to 20%. So,
Yeah.
you
You
know,
just have to be
so you
consistent.
just have to be close. Right? You just have to be close. No, like I said, the chips are 200 calories. Maybe this thing, you know, a fist is about a serving of pasta. No, a fistful of pasta is Y number of calories. Just develop that feeling that you sit down and have a bowl of pasta with some sauce. The tomato sauce, if done properly, probably doesn't have many calories. Tomatoes don't have many calories. Assuming you're not buying one of these, American brands that's also loaded with sugar. Um, but don't and have a proper serving.
Yeah.
Like I said about this one, don't fill your plate and have a pound of it. Right?
Yeah.
It's developing that instinct on how much a serving is and how many calories are in that serving.
Yeah, I am happy to hear that the practice of tracking has helped you really be more aware around eating behaviors in general. I want to also ask this from a slightly different perspective because obviously tracking calories is an objective change around something that you do physically, right? But besides that, how has your mindset around fitness and nutrition, and maybe even your own relationship with your body, how has that changed over the past couple of months?
Well, mm, the relationship with my body has gotten better, right? Now, first off, the obvious, I'm no longer buying double X t-shirts, right? And I have a whole closet full of them, and I'm buying XLs. And depending upon the manufacturer, even L's, larges, you know. So that right there in of itself, I think, is a huge confidence boost, a huge boost to your ego. This is making a difference. Um, you know, you go put a pair of jeans on, it's like, whoa, I think I'm gonna need to go shopping. Yeah. Um, you, you cinch it up with a belt and it's still like, whoa, I got an awful lot of extra belt here. These little things, at least for me, are the real ego booster, right? Um, they're the things that really help. Um, they're more than anything else, I think are the things that really help me personally. When you start looking at all these small changes you've made, which cascade up into monster changes, have led now to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've gone from, 40 waist jeans, 36, and now 36 seemed large at times, from double X shirts down to XL, sometimes even larges. All these little pieces, um, all these little I hate to call them sacrifices, but little changes in behavior you've made, um, now start having a real impact on your self-esteem, your ego, and your overall health. I mean,
Yeah.
I've taken running at 10K every Saturday as part of my kind of, I don't know what you call it, was it low, slow, and steady cardio? Um, and I could do that pretty well. And, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I'm pretty sure I couldn't have.
Yeah.
So the little changes that cascade into something big. And, yeah, all little changes can be hard at times. But my personal opinion is they're worth it. I mean, it is your health. And, like it or not, we're kind of only here once, right?
Yeah.
So make the best of it,
Yeah.
make the best of it. Yeah. It's easy into a routine, a grind, and sometimes that can take you down the wrong path. And sometimes it can take you down the wrong path, you knowing it until it's too late. But then you wake up one day and say, man, this sucks being this way.
Yeah.
What do I have to do? And I think we're getting to the point where between coaching, between these modern drugs, where you can out of that rut if you're willing to put the work in. When I say put the work in, I just don't mean in the gym. I mean, a lot of it has to happen up here, with your mindset, how you think about things,
Yeah.
how you think about your relationship with food. Um, are you willing to really even kind of call yourself out at times? Like, you reach in the cupboard, I'm kind of hungry, but it's 9 o'clock at night. Do you really need that at 9 o'clock at night? Really? I mean, you're probably going to wake up hungry anyway. Why do you eat now? Just go to bed hungry and you're going to wake up hungry, right?
Yeah.
Or you really can tell yourself you're hungry. Has raw vegetables, right? I keep container raw vegetables in the fridge all the time. Carrots, broccoli, cauliflower. If you really can tell yourself, yes, I'm hungry at 9 o'clock at night, have some vegetables. Right. filling, lots of fiber. As a culture, we don't get enough fiber, eat more fiber. And it works great. And, there's virtually no calories in raw vegetables, right? Um, it's just most of the changes have to happen between your ears, nowhere else.
Yeah. And I do want to point out what you mentioned of, like you said, I don't like to call it sacrifices, but they are sacrifices. Like, objectively, if we look at the definition of a sacrifice, you're making a change in behavior, right? And really everything we do in life requires some degree of sacrifice. Some things require smaller sacrifices, some things require bigger sacrifices. But the truth is that in certain circumstances, sacrifice is very worth it, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
absolutely.
hey, the benefit of making the sacrifice far outweighs the pain of the sacrifice itself. And I think what's difficult for people, Randy, is to remind themselves of that in any given situation. This is something that I think I do relatively well when it comes to food, and I'll provide a specific example of what I mean. But it's like, at the end of the day, you don't want to be super restrictive in your approach to nutrition, but you do have to say no to things in certain circumstances. And one thing that helps me is like my wife and I have pretty different eating behaviors. Although we both eat pretty healthy, but like if we go, sometimes there are times where there's multiple events back to back within a week or within 2 weeks, and you go out with friends, and there's this celebration, and you have a trip coming up, and it's really easy to let yourself go in those situations. But one thing I actively remind myself of is that when I'm choosing foods, by the way, I'm flexible. I let myself have some chips or whatever I want, but most of the times I opt for the healthier choices. And the reason why I opt for them is not because I can't have the other foods. It's because I actively remind myself that eating healthy aligns with my goal of being a healthy person, of feeling good. I actively remind myself that I know that if I have this healthy meal, I will feel better after, you know? And then also, like, you can really learn to enjoy the taste and flavor of healthy food. Like, healthy food doesn't have to taste bad by any means, right? So
Mhm.
I'm happy that you've been
Not
able to
at
acknowledge
all.
those things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Um,
The last,
my wife and I switched. We're essentially vegans.
okay.
Um, Vegetarians at the worst. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of hard to like go into a Mexican restaurant and not get cheese on everything.
Practically impossible.
Yeah, exactly. It's- We're largely vegans, and I think that it's also really helped. Um, I look back 10 years ago or more before this change happened, and I really do wonder, even back when really long ago, 20 years ago when I was doing the keto thing, I just wonder, you know, I mean, there's so especially some of these meat products, you eat a steak, I mean, the calorie density is so high. And it's people, especially here, I don't know how it is overseas, but here in the States, you go, you're a small steak and it's still, 12 ounces, which is still much larger than a portion that you should be eating, right? And the portion control thing is just, or the portions in restaurants have gotten so out of control. Uh, you know, I- it's just really hard.
Yeah.
I personally am glad we made the switch. Um, and I'm not going to be harp on it, but I think it's made it much easier to understand calorie content of things, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many calories in fat, and being able to, well, I don't really consume that many except olive oil, I think is a big step in the right direction.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Randy. Besides the physical results of losing 20 pounds since you've been with us, 70 pounds total since you started, and you mentioned, feeling more confident, feeling better about yourself. How has this journey so far changed your life?
Well, besides, you feel more confident, higher self-esteem. Of course, sometimes as part of my day job, you get on conference calls and people immediately say, you don't got big, chipmunk cheeks and all that. You really do look thinner. People give you compliments, and that also when people recognize that, it's hell of a confidence booster in a lot of cases when people recognize that you have been doing something, you've changed. Um, and then, the fact that at this point, I've just made exercise a part of my life. Um, there's a quote, I know I shared this on the group chat at one general forum at one point. And actually it's due to, um, a fellow here from Kansas. And it was motivation's what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can be motivated to lose weight, get out, go for a walk every day, but you have to make that daily walk a habit.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely critical. You have to make exercise a habit in your life. After dinner, it's what I do. I strap my lifting shoes on. I go out in the garage and I lift weights. It's what I do. It's part of my daily routine. I, I think it's very hard to overemphasize that you have to make these habits. You have to make these behaviors habits.
Yeah. So you feel like the things that have been slowly becoming habitual also feel easier to stick to, I'm assuming, and don't feel like they're as much of a struggle. And I bring this up specifically, Randy, because people also are fearful of, or maybe not even fearful, but nervous that when they start this whole health and fitness thing, it's hard, right? It's hard. Would you acknowledge that over time it becomes easier as you start to see the wins, as you start to build positive rapport and actually see the benefits of what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the number of times I've stopped lifting and started again, I can't count, right?
Yeah.
But there's always, you start lifting again, and the next morning after doing heavy squats, it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I can't sit, I can't stand up. It hurts. Everything hurts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. But once you get into the grind, you're doing it consistently. You don't, you may get the next morning feel a little stiff, a little bit of soreness, but the hard pain is gone.
Yeah.
And I don't know about most people, I only know about me. But once I get into this habit kind of thing, if I miss a workout, I kind of feel guilty. You know, Well, I didn't lift today. I kind of feel bad about that. I left myself down.
Yeah.
Now that might be a negative behavior long term as well, but at least as long as I'm in the weight loss part of it, I think that's quite good, right? Because I find that motivating as well. I don't want to let myself down.
Yeah. And even with the nutrition behaviors, Randy, I think like what people don't realize is that we're not going to lie, it's hard at first. It is really hard, especially if you've never focused on these things. But it's like, man, I've never tracked calories. I don't even know how to do that. I know I need to eat protein. I don't know what foods to eat that are high in protein. Then you realize that your diet isn't that high in protein. You need to make changes. And like, it's a lot, right? But what I will tell you for sure, if you're listening and that message resonates with you, is that if you just stay committed and you do your best, it slowly becomes easier, and it becomes easier as your skills
Absolutely.
up, right? And not only does it become easier, it becomes enjoyable. The things that were once difficult become enjoyable because you start to see the benefits, and you start to build internal rapport with the things that you're doing, right? Like I tell people, I would consider myself a healthy and in shape person. I wouldn't say it requires me any discipline or motivation to do those things because I like doing these things. And that's the place that we try to help our clients get to, right? If we can do things in a way that's evidence-based and actually helps you make progress, if we could do things in a way that's sustainable and we can get you to the point where you actually enjoy it, the rest is history. Like to get to where you want to get to, it's just going to take time because progress is slow. Essentially, you've developed the skills necessary to get there. And it sounds like you're definitely on that path, which makes me super happy to hear.
Well, I think the sustainability thing it can't be understated, right?
Hmm.
I like lifting at night. I
Yeah.
think it's a great way to break stress after the end of the day, right? Um, I get it if you don't like picking up heavy things, maybe you like bicycle. Um, you know, maybe you like rowing. Get on the, go buy a
Mhm.
concept two and row the English Channel
Yeah,
or the equivalent. Find something that works for you.
yeah,
That's the biggest thing.
yeah. Let me ask you this,
And
Randy,
there's
'cause
so many options these days.
yeah. You had mentioned, like even getting on a conference call and your coworkers realizing that you have lost weight. I'm interested. What are some things you've heard from colleagues, friends, family, your wife? How has this impacted your relationship with friends and family? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, um, so one that comes to mind is a sales rep I've worked with closely for 7 or 8 years. I updated because in Teams, right, Microsoft Teams, you can put your picture up in the corner, right? And we've been on a few calls where he was like, "Randy, is that you? I see your name, but it looks different. You look smaller." Little things like that, and you go, "Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I'm down, X number of pounds right now." So, those little things can, yeah, again, it's an ego booster. And sometimes we all just need a pat on the back, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes we just need a little boy kind of thing, Um, even if you're doing everything right, you feel good about yourself, you feel your self-esteem is building. Um, Sometimes just a pat on the back does an amazing thing for you. And I've had that happen with a couple people.
yeah.
So, and I have a colleague also at work. He's on my team, actually. He's been taking Manjaro, I think.
Hmm.
And we kind of got a little informal contest on who's going to lose the most weight. Um, I'm probably going to lose because he's a good deal smaller than I am, but that kind of camaraderie also helps kind of fuel. I got to go harder, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
add a
And
couple
like you
more,
mentioned,
add more weight to the bar tonight. We'll
yeah,
go it.
yeah. And like you mentioned, Randy, like obviously, we don't do this just for external validation by any means, but it does feel good, right? Like I think as humans, we like being recognized for the things that we're working hard on. And if the people that are close to us are recognizing the positive things that we're working on, it always feels great. Um, Let me ask you this final question before we wrap up. Two things I want to ask actually. If someone listening, Randy, is resonating with your message and is where you were when you started, they're feeling stuck, they're frustrated, they're trying to lose weight, things aren't working, what would you want them to know?
Mm. First off, it's possible. I
Yeah.
mean, it is possible. I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm kind of proof of it, right? Gone from almost 280, now I'm pushing 200, right? It is possible. Um, I hate to push drugs, but these GLP-1 drugs work. They
Yeah.
work, mm, but I don't think they're the whole answer. I think they again are part of the puzzle. They get you in the right direction. They get you losing weight. Then you've got to do something else. And that something else is you have to deal with what's inside your head, potentially habits that have evolved and over decades in some cases. Well, in my case, and dealing with that and asking yourself really hard questions sometimes is painful, you know, but it can be done. And if you're open, you're willing to accept, I think coaching helps enormously because at some point you have to look outside yourself because, you've got these mindsets that also have developed over years and years and years. Having someone outside who can look in on you and say, well, maybe you should try this, think about this. That's outside of your own head is interesting. I mean, you can read books all you want, but having someone who is actively involved and actively you're working with is is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you touched on there the last question I wanted to ask, which is like, what advice would you give somebody who's on the fence about coaching and they're not sure?
Um, what would let me think here. It's a tougher question.
Yeah.
Um, I th- I think it's worth it. Um, if nothing else, should be short term just to see if it works for you, because I can see there's some people who um are potentially just so stubborn in their own ways that
Yeah.
they're not good at accepting, constructive criticism.
Yeah.
In that case, I don't know what to say. It isn't going to work for you, but
Yeah.
you have to be open. You have to say, okay, I'm open to this criticism. I'm going to take it, internalize it, think about it, and understand how I can roll that into my behavior, how my behavior can change based on that. Not all, I don't think I've incorporated everything, Brent
Mhm.
has told me, my coach, Brent, but a lot of things I have.
Yeah.
And some of the things like before you reach in the cabinet because you feel hungry, are you really hungry? Because we know lots of things mask themselves as hunger, right? Maybe you're just thirsty. Take it, go big glass of water, see if it changes things. There's lots of things that impact your hunger, and it may not be real physical hunger. So there's lots of things to think about. And sometimes having someone outside of yourself make these comments, make suggestions, I think helps a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's helped me a lot. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate the honest answer, Randy, because the truth is that like you do have to be in the right position to benefit from coaching as well. Right.
yeah,
That's why I actually think, Randy, a lot of people who are just getting started in this whole health and fitness thing and haven't tried anything before might not benefit too much from coaching because maybe they're not fully convinced that like they can't just do keto and lose weight because their friend did and they're super successful with it, right? And understanding that you do need to be open minded, you do have to be open to feedback, you do have to make changes. But if you're ready to do those things and you want guidance, then I think obviously coaching is super helpful. But I'm happy that you differentiate there as well. Like you do have to be ready for it because it is hard and you do have to take feedback and you do have to change things.
absolutely. Um, I don't know if this is going to be a perfect analogy, but it's kind of like someone who maybe drinks too much. You have you have to be in a place where you finally say is enough, is enough, done. I have to make changes. Um, and I think okay, so I changed my son. I think that's very analogous, right? You're overweight. Maybe you can't play in the backyard with your kid like you'd like to. You can't go for runs with your dog like you'd like to. Whatever. Um, but you have to, and that long term, this is not where you need to be.
Yeah.
And long term, this is a huge detriment to my health. So you just have to make a conscious decision that for my children or for this or for that, for my spouse, for my family, whatever, I have to make this change. And you have to get this mindset that I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yeah. It's definitely hard. Awesome, Randy. Well, I think this is a perfect place to wrap this up. Again, I just want to say thank you for
Mhm.
uh, being open to coming on here and sharing your experience with everybody. I've truly appreciated this conversation and getting to know your journey a little bit more. Uh, we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Absolutely.